It can be awesome to see different birds in your backyard, but sometimes you'll see one and go, what is that? So I thought it would be really cool to compile an ultimate guide to backyard bird identification. This is going to have species from the eastern United States, species in the western United States, and it's going to cover most of the common ones with how to identify them, some of their songs and calls, and what other similar species might look like. So here's some things to look for when you see a species you're not sure about. You want to look at the color. So that's probably the first thing you notice. Is it red? Is it brown? Also the shape. What size is it? And where is it hanging out? And what behavior is it doing? Is it sitting on the ground? Is it kicking its feet back and forth? Is it climbing up the trunk of the tree? Another thing to look at is what is the bird eating? Is it hanging from a thistle feeder? Is it feeding on seeds from the ground? Is it at the suet feeder? And then also, did it vocalize? So what noises was it making? And then once you have a species that you think fits, you want to check the range. A lot of times species are going to hang out within their range, but sometimes you will get some rare ones where they'll end up way across the United States in a place they probably shouldn't be. It's great to look at all these different things, and it can really help you narrow it down. Also, if you're able to get a picture of that bird, that helps a lot because you're able to then reference it and check with your resources to see, was that actually what I saw? So a quick disclaimer before we get started on this tour of the backyard. We're going to talk about these different bird species. This is going to apply to most of the eastern and western United States. If you live in a very specialized region, you might see some completely different birds altogether. I'm thinking like South Texas, you might have green jays in your backyard where they're not going to be really anywhere else in the United States, or if you're in Southeast Arizona. So this is going to be species you'll see from a general perspective. If you picked a spot in the east, picked a spot in the west, these are the species you're probably going to find. Before we get started, I want to talk about something called sexual dimorphism, and that just means that the males and females look different. So for some of these species, male and female are going to look the same. And for some of them, male and female are going to look very different. So we'll be talking about some of these species that are sexually dimorphic. Also, some species are going to look different depending on the season. Others look the same year round. So with that in mind, let's get into these different species and where you might find them. To start out, I'm here on the ground because this is normally where you'll see sparrows at your bird feeder. They like the really shrubby areas, then they'll move in, eat, and then they'll kind of go back to those spots. Sometimes they'll sit in the trees, but most often I see them feeding on the ground. One of the most common sparrows you'll see is the house sparrow. They're actually a non-native species. They were introduced into the United States and they can be rather aggressive. So a lot of people dislike them because of that fact. And males are going to have a dark head with a black bib and a brown back with a lighter stomach. Females are going to be more tan with some patchy brown on the back. Now, some other sparrows you might see is the American tree sparrow. They move further south in the winter. They're going to have a rufous cap with a rufous eyeline, and they will be feeding mostly on the ground, although as I said, they will go into bushes and nearby trees. In the summer, you'll likely see chipping sparrows. They have a black line through their eye, as well as a rufous cap, and they'll be relatively small in size. Furthermore, we have the song sparrow, which at least by us in Wisconsin, that's the most common sparrow we see when you're kind of away from your yard. If you're out quite a bit, you'll probably pick up on what the song sounds like. They're a little more streaked, and I'll put some images of them in here so you can check them out as well as their vocalization. Also, the bird that people refer to as snowbirds, the dark-eyed junco, can be found throughout the States. They look quite different depending on where you are, which subspecies you're seeing, but as of right now, they're all considered the same species. So for example, there's the slate-colored dark-eyed junco. They're more gray with the white stomach, and then there's like a white-winged version and just a bunch that look different, but they're all still considered dark-eyed juncos. Then you have the white-throated sparrow, which adults have the white under the throat, the white crowned sparrow, where they have white on the top of the head. And you also have birds that are a little larger called towhees that still fall into the sparrow category. They also like to be on the ground, and towhees and other sparrows will do this thing where they kind of kick the ground back and forth. It's not just a sparrow maneuver, but I see them doing it a lot to kind of uncover seeds underneath. So they'll hop their feet back and forth, try to scrape up what's underneath so they can get to it and eat it. Sparrows can be tough to identify, so make sure you look at all the features and it helps to get photos, but here are some other sparrow species as well. That was so cool. Little chickadee. They will hop in very quickly and take a seed and then go. So normally they don't hang out too long, but they'll eat it in a nearby tree. Sometimes they'll peck it into the tree to store it. They're really fun and playful birds, adorable and really enjoyable to watch, so they're normally a backyard favorite. So the chickadee is going to be one of the more common birds in your yard, especially if you live in the eastern US. So you'll have black-capped chickadees more in the north. They're going to have a dark head, black, separated by some white with gray and tan. And in the southeast, you'll actually have the Carolina chickadee, which looks very similar to the black-capped. Some people say they can identify them based on where they are, but a lot of times it's looking at the range and which one is most likely to be there. As you move into the west, you will have other types of chickadees, such as the mountain chickadee or the chestnut-back chickadee, and then also titmice. So in the east, you have the tufted titmouse. They're gray, they're gonna be bigger than the black-capped chickadee, and they're gonna have a crest. And then if you move into other places, you'll have different types of titmice. But titmice behave very similar to chickadees. They're very vocal. Chickadees have super notable vocalizations, and so do the titmice. Now we're here by this tree trunk because we're going to talk about nuthatches and tree creepers. These are birds that you will likely see climbing up the trunk or a branch of your tree, and nuthatches very characteristically will climb down and kind of pop their head out. So if you see that shape, it is likely a nuthatch or a similar tree climbing species. The brown creeper has a more of like a sickle-shaped bill. They blend in really well with the tree trunk. They will climb up and then they'll fly down to either the same tree trunk or another one or a branch and climb up. One nuthatch species that can be found throughout the United States is the white-breasted nuthatch, and they actually kind of look like little sharks. They have like a dark blue gray back with a lighter stomach, and then you also have the red-breasted nuthatch, and they make some different vocalizations as well. So here are some of the nuthatches and the tree creeper species. The pygmy nuthatch and brown-headed nuthatch look extremely similar, with some size differences, but are most easily identified by region, with the pygmy nuthatch in parts of the western United States and the brown-headed nuthatch in the southeastern United States. Move down to this brush pile to talk about wrens because they love brush and shrubby cover. And wrens are going to be small birds with relatively large tails, and they can almost look mouse-like if you just see them move. So species such as the winter wren, they're going to be a little more chocolatey brown, a little more round as opposed to elongated, and they will move really quickly in shrubby cover like this, and you might just see them go so fast that you think it may have been a mouse. And they'll go into holes and do all kinds of crazy, goofy stuff. Wrens are also very boisterous. So one of the more common ones is the house wren. They will be super loud in the spring, and they're cavity nesters, so you might find them inside a birdhouse. You also have the Carolina wren, normally found in the eastern United States. They're one of the loudest birds in your neighborhood. They have the tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle vocalization. Along with the wrens, you have the gnatcatchers. They're going to be more high up in the branches. At least by us in Wisconsin, they show up in the spring normally, and they are blue-gray in coloration, and males will actually get these crazy angry eyebrows that just look ridiculous during the breeding season, and you might encounter them up in the trees and around your backyard. Now let's move on to thrushes and mimids. The most common thrush that you would probably see in your yard is the American robin. They'll be hopping around in the grass looking for worms, but they will also eat fruit as well as a couple other different food sources. They're gonna have that orangish red breast with a darker gray-brown back, and they'll often be foraging or sitting up high in trees, vocalizing. They're one of the first birds to sing in the morning, so that's probably your most common thrush. Additionally, you might see hermit thrushes in your yard. So they're gonna have a grayish brown back with kind of a more reddish tail. And there's a couple other thrush species that look similar, such as the gray-cheeked thrush and the Swainson's thrush. And this category of thrushes and mimids also includes the northern mockingbird, which is super common, longer tail, gray coloration overall. It's probably singing a variety of different songs. They actually do mimic things, and they'll mimic stuff like car alarms, which is super goofy. So you might hear some human noises in there too, but they're very vocal. Brown thrashers fit into this category as well. They are also a mimid, so they will mimic other noises. Also very vocal. They may be sitting right on top of a tree or a branch, singing their heart away. And also bluebirds fit into this category too. So in the eastern part of the US, you'll have the eastern bluebird. They're also cavity nesters. They love mealworms, so if you put out mealworms, they might be coming there. And if you have an open yard, you're more likely to see these birds. So they're more common in the open field edge habitat spots. And then in the west, you have the western bluebird. So a lot of different bluebirds could be around, as well as those other thrushes and mimids. Next up, we have the fan favorite warblers. And warblers are much easier to identify in the spring when they're all colorful and in their breeding plumage. In the fall, they'll also be around, but they'll be much more muted. So we're gonna show them mostly in the spring plumage, but note that in the fall they might look a little different, or at least most of them probably will. Let's start off with the yellow-rumped warbler. They're gonna be grayish blue on the body with some black and a yellow patch on their rump. Now it's worth noting that in the east you have a variety called the myrtle yellow-rumped warbler, and in the west you have the Audubon's yellow-rumped warbler, and these look pretty different. So if you're in the east and west, you might think that you're seeing a totally new species, but it's actually still the yellow-rumped warbler. Additionally, you have the magnolia warbler, which has some really striking yellows, grays, and blacks. Then you have the American redstart, which is black and orange, super striking. They're most likely to be seen around your yard, but they will pick at suet feeders. We had a pine warbler show up in the winter once, and it was actually eating seeds, and I think it did come to the suet feeder as well. So they'll do some interesting things, but they'll be around your backyard, likely during those migratory seasons if you live by some good habitat. So I'm gonna have a bunch of pictures of the warblers with some of their vocalizations that you can look through. Along with the warblers, you may also have vireos. They're normally a little bigger than the warbler species, and the most common ones you may see is the red-eyed vireo, the warbling vireo, and the white-eyed vireo. The vireos are normally going to be high up in the trees, maybe even in the tops of the trees where you're just spending your time looking straight up, but they're a good species to look for along with the warblers, especially during migration. I moved on to be by the thistle feeder because we're going to talk about finches next. They love these hanging feeders with thistle or Niger seed, and they will actually hang upside down to pick at it. So it's pretty fun to watch if you have a feeder loaded up with the different finch species. One of the most common in the east is the American goldfinch. They're bright yellow in the summer, males have some black on their head, and then in the winter they actually get much duller. So that color changes quite a bit, even though they're the same species. They might look quite different during the different seasons. Mixed in with those goldfinches, you might have pine siskins. They're an eruptive species, meaning they'll move further south depending on the year, based on how much food they have up north. So they're gonna look more streaked. They might be mixed in with your goldfinches. Additionally, the house finch is a very common species you might see as well. Males are gonna be tannish with a striped stomach and some red up here. Females are gonna be more brown overall, and they are sexually dimorphic, so they do look different. With the house finch, you have the similar looking purple finch, which is also an eruptive species. Males are going to look much more purple red and wine stained as opposed to the lighter red in the house finch, and that purple is throughout more of the body, no streaking on the stomach. Females look similar to the female house finch, but they have some white lines on the face. There's also some other differences to look at. We have a full purple finch versus house finch guide if you want to learn more about how to differentiate those two. In the west, you have the lesser goldfinch, which has some wing bars. They are more olive green, black with yellow as well. And then you also might have the Cassin's finch at your feeder, which looks similar to the purple finch, but with a more peaked crown that might be a little brighter red and more white on the stomach. That's also in the purple versus house finch guide if you want to learn about Cassin's finches as well. Furthermore, a lot of the eruptive species are finches, so they may show up in greater or lesser numbers or be completely absent depending on the year, so make sure to keep an eye out for those. I went and grabbed the suet feeder. We're going to talk about woodpeckers next. They love coming to these little suet feeders. And if you have one that has this is actually a tail prop, so their tail can sit a little more comfortably while they eat. But woodpeckers, you'll often see them climbing up the trunks and branches of your trees, and they will fly away with an undulating flight. So they'll flap a couple times, stop, flap a couple times, stop, and keep going. One of the most common woodpeckers you will encounter is the downy woodpecker. They're relatively small, about the size of a sparrow. Black and white coloration. Males are going to have a red spot on the back of their head that females lack. Now, the bigger version of the downy is the hairy woodpecker. It's going to be more the size of a thrush, like a robin. Males actually have 2 red spots on the back of their head, and their bill is significantly larger. We have a whole identification guide of hairy versus downy woodpecker if you want to learn more about those. Additionally, you'll have the red-bellied woodpecker, which does not have a lot of red on the belly, and this really bothers a lot of people. Sometimes you will see a little bit. However, this bird was actually named in the hand, so somebody was holding it and they could see the red on the stomach better. Now they do have some red on the back of their head as well as a black and light coloration back. But if you see the red-headed woodpecker, you will admit that that's probably a better name for the red-headed woodpecker than the red-bellied, because that one has an all-red head. A dark back with white on the trailing edge of the wings that forms like a little triangle shape on the back of their feathers. Another one I want to mention is the pileated woodpecker, and they are absolutely massive. If you've never seen one before and you see it for the first time, it's probably going to be a little shocking with how huge they actually are. And they make these huge excavations in trees. So if you see this almost like square carving into a tree, it's probably the work of a pileated woodpecker. And they will come to backyards sometimes. A few more woodpecker species you may see are the northern flicker and the yellow-bellied sapsucker. The northern flicker can be seen in the east and west, and there are two subspecies, the red-shafted and yellow-shafted. However, both are considered the same species. The yellow-bellied sapsucker is an eastern species that occurs in the northeast in the summer into Canada, and then moves further south in the winter. Next up on our list, we have the doves, and they really love coming to platform feeders. So one of the most common doves you might find is the mourning dove, and they make the iconic cooing noise that a lot of people associate with playing outside as a kid. So I think people just don't go outside as much, and then they're like, they're extinct, I've never seen them, or I've never heard them after that. But they're still around. They're very common in backyards. Other people think it's an owl, so listen to it real quick, see if you recognize the iconic coo of the mourning dove. There's a lot of other dove species that might come to your yard as well. They are pretty large. They can be a little dominant at a feeder space, but in general, I think of them as being pretty peaceful. They'll hang out under the seeds or on the platform feeders, and they'll also sit up on the trees and wires around your neighborhood. So here's some of the other dove species you might encounter. The Eurasian collar dove is a non-native species in the US and can be identified by the black collar marking on the back of their neck. The band-tailed pigeon is found mostly in the western United States and is pink and gray with some iridescence on their neck along with a white crescent marking. In parts of the southern and southwestern United States, you may see the small Inca dove or common ground dove. Common ground doves are smaller and have a scaling pattern on just their neck and chest. In Inca doves, the scaling pattern covers more of their body. In this category with doves are also pigeons, and people kind of give them a bad reputation that I don't think they really deserve. They're pretty social, pretty calm, pretty chill birds, and I don't really think they deserve all the hate, but they may also show up at your bird feeder too, and they come in a wide variety of colors. Although they're probably not coming to your bird feeder unless you have a pretty wild setup, we're going to talk about some of the owls you might find in your backyard. So let's start with the large great horned owl. They're brownish overall with some orange, not too bright, but some dull orange, with big ear tufts that stick up. And they make the classic hoo 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 hoo. In addition to the great horned owl, you might have barred owls. They're more gray with some white cream colors, and they make the "Who Cooks For You" vocalization. Then we have the smaller eastern screech owl, and in the west you have the western screech owl, and there's a bunch of different screech owl varieties. But at least the eastern comes in a gray morph and a red morph, so they might be more gray overall or more red. Now let's talk about some of the different hawks you might see in your yard. Some people don't like having hawks around because they will prey on your backyard birds, but it really is just part of nature, and the hawks do have to eat. So let's start off with the larger Cooper's hawk. Adults are going to be grayish blue on the back with a reddish barred stomach. And they'll look like they have a more capped appearance. So they'll have dark on the head and it'll stop by the neck and become much lighter or absent. The smaller sharp-shinned hawk looks very similar to the Coopers, but it's smaller overall, and it's going to have a more hooded appearance, and it's going to look a little more bug-eyed. So they have a tiny head. It kind of looks like they just don't have any neck. And then it's a little harder to tell the juveniles apart from each other, but we did a whole Coopers versus sharp-shinned hawk video that you can check out if you want to learn more about differentiating those two species. Additionally, you may have red-tailed hawks nearby, and most versions of this species do have the reddish tail as adults. On juveniles, it's much lighter, but there's a ton of different red-tailed hawk subspecies, so they may look a little different depending on where you go. A lot of times the adults will have a brown band of feathers on the stomach, known as a belly band, and that's a pretty good indicator that it's likely a red-tailed hawk. The Coopers and the Sharpshin are going to be the ones that are swooping in really fast and flying through forests maneuverably, as opposed to the red-tailed hawk. I feel like they're more an open space bird. They like to hunt in those fields, lots, stuff like that, as opposed to the Coopers and Sharpshin, which are more forest specialists. Now let's move on to the Blackbirds and the Orioles. If you live in a marshy area, you might actually get red-winged blackbirds at your feeder. And adult males are black with a red patch on their wing that is normally outlined in yellow as well. So that's pretty distinctive in the adults. You don't always see that patch super noticeably, but at least a little bit of it should be there. The females are more brown and streaked, and they will have some orange on them too. Some people think the female red-winged blackbird is actually a sparrow species. So if it looks like a really big sparrow, double check female red-winged blackbird first. Additionally, you have the brown-headed cowbird. Many people don't like them because they're actually brood parasites, meaning they'll lay their eggs in the nests of other birds, and then those birds will raise the cowbird young, which often grows faster and larger and outcompetes the other species. So if you see a tiny warbler or something like that raising a huge bird, it's probably a brood parasite, likely a brown-headed cowbird. Males are glossy black with a brown head, and females and juveniles are more gray overall. Additionally, you'll probably see some common grackles. They have long tails, they're very iridescent, and they have a yellow eye in the adults. And some other places you might get great-tailed grackles or boat-tailed grackles, which will have even longer tails. And a lot of that is looking at what range you're in. And there's some things you can look at, such as eye color, but they're doing genetic tests to see if that holds true all the time. So where they overlap, it can be a little difficult to tell them apart. But in most of the range, you can tell, this is probably going to be a boat-tailed, this is probably going to be a great-tailed. And also in the blackbird category, we have our Orioles. So the beautiful Baltimore Oriole, the classic orange and black color on them, they love fruit and jelly feeders. Some people disagree with having jelly out, but some people say it's fine. So they'll often come to jelly feeders. They'll sip from hummingbird feeders, and they're a great bird to have in your backyard, and they really brighten up any time of year. In the West, one of your more common Oriole species is going to be the Bullocks Oriole. And they're going to be very brightly colored with orange and black, but some different identification markings compared to the Baltimore Oriole. Since it's winter, I don't actually have a hummingbird feeder out right now, but we're going to talk about some different hummingbird species. In the east, really your only common hummingbird that isn't rare is the ruby-throated hummingbird. And adults are going to be greenish with a bright red gorget in the males, which the females lack. So that's your most common hummingbird species in the east. Anything else is likely rare. If you go to the west, there are so many different hummingbirds, and they are so incredibly beautiful. The males normally much more colorful than the females, but the females are beautiful in their own way too. But note that they are different and that the males are way easier to tell apart than the females. One of the more common western hummingbirds is the rufous hummingbird, and they're pretty small and compact, and they're going to have a lot of orange on them with a super bright gorget in the males, but they're going to look like totally orange. Sometimes they have green on their back as well. Some of the goofiest birds you might see in your backyard are the corvids, such as the American crow, the blackbird with the iconic cawing noise that they make. Sometimes they'll show up in people's backyards or just flying over. And additionally, blue jays are actually in the corvid family. So they're a fan favorite in the east. They have that crested appearance with the blue, variations of light blue, dark blue, as well as some black and gray. And they're actually really good at mimicking too. So they've been known to make the red-tailed hawk vocalization to scare birds away from the feeder so they can come in, grab some food, and have the whole feeder to themselves. So they're very goofy, very charismatic species. In the west, you may have Steller's jays. They're larger jays with a black crest, super beautiful birds. And then you also have the California scrub jays and the Woodhouse's scrub jays, depending on where you're at. So they're also going to be blue with some differences in coloration and look compared to the Steller's jay. Their heads are not crested like the Steller's jay is. Also mostly in the west, but not exclusively, you might see the common raven. They're going to be larger than American crows with a bulkier bill. Also in the west, the black-billed magpie might show up. They're black and white with blue iridescence and a long tail. Additionally, let's talk about the waxwings quickly. The cedar waxwing may be in your backyard, and they will often be in large flocks. So you'll see a group of waxwings up in the trees, and they're gonna be tan in coloration with some waxy secretions on their wings that almost look like these tiny little red protrusions sticking out. And they will have yellow on the tip of their tail, as well as a crest. Now let's talk about the flycatchers. Some of these birds are notorious for being difficult to identify. But thankfully, a lot of the ones that you'll probably see in your backyard are going to be a bit easier. So one of the common ones that may nest in your backyard is actually the eastern phoebe. They're known for flicking their tail, and they have a dark head and a brown body. One behavior to look for in flycatchers is they will go out, try to catch an insect or catch some kind of food, and then come back to the same area. So if they're doing that, that's known as flycatching. It's likely one of the flycatcher species or something very similar. They also make the phoebe vocalization. Similar to the eastern phoebe is the eastern wood pewee, which can be seen in the eastern US, and the western wood pewee in the western US. They're gonna look a little more vested, like they have some dark here on this side and that side. And they make the pewee vocalization, so it's a little more drawn out than the eastern phoebe. Additionally, you might see the great crested flycatcher, which is larger. It's gonna have more yellow on the stomach, and it makes a loud breep vocalization. In the west, as opposed to having the eastern phoebe, the more common black phoebe is present. So it's similar looking to the eastern phoebe with black instead of the brown, and then a lighter stomach. Now let's talk about the fan favorite Buntings and Grosbeaks. And this includes the beautiful northern cardinal found in the eastern United States. It's gonna be bright red with a crest for males, and then brownish tan for the females with some red accenting. I feel like the female is a little underrated. They're still very beautiful, but they'll come to feeders like this, your kind of standard seed feeders, platform feeders, and they're actually known for feeding really late in the day. So sometimes they won't even come to the bird feeder until after the sun's actually set, and they'll be one of the last species to come in and get some food. Additionally, in the east, you may be seeing the rose-breasted grosbeak. The males have the red marking on the chest. They're absolutely gorgeous birds. And in the west, you have the black-headed grosbeak. They're gonna have a little more orange on them, and males and females look different for the grosbeak species. Also, the buntings are very beautiful, such as the indigo bunting in the east. Just a bright blue bird, kind of looks like a blue gumball. Really striking, really beautiful to see if you see one on the edge of your yard. I don't see them really come to feeders much. It's just kind of during migration, you might see them around. And if you're super lucky in the southeast, you may encounter a painted bunting. The males look like something a child drew. It's a collection of different colors all together. They're often the covers of different bird books because they're so beautiful. And the females are kind of a plain greenish color. Additionally, you may see some tanagers in your yard. They're another group of birds that are absolutely gorgeous. The scarlet tanager is red with some striking black wings. You have the summer tanager that is red without the dark wings and might also have some yellow. Now the females of these tanager species do look different, so keep an eye out for male versus female differences. And then you have the western tanager in the west, with the adults being yellow with dark wings and a reddish head. And let's quickly run through some of the swallow and swift species. These normally aren't going to be in your yard itself, but flying over it. So you may have the tree swallow, and they're actually cavity nesters, and they may be nesting nearby. Or if you have a super large property with a lot of open space and some nest boxes, they may actually be nesting in there. But they're gonna have a darkish blue-green back with a light underside. Additionally, you have the barn swallow, and I normally identify them in flight because they have a forked tail, while many of the other swallow species don't. They're gonna have a reddish-brown throat and blue wings and back. And then finally, we have the chimney swifts, which kind of looks like they're little flying cigars. They have a long body with wings that kind of stick straight out, and they will be fluttering around in the sky. During migration, they'll actually group up and funnel into chimneys as night is approaching, and it looks like smoke reversing into a chimney. Sometimes they have events where you can come and watch this if they know a specific roost site, and they make little twittering noises. And while we're here, let's talk about the kinglets. Now these are adorable, tiny little birds that will be flitting around. They move very quickly, and it's really hard to get media of them normally. I remember when I started birding, I spent like 30 minutes trying to get a picture of a golden crowned kinglet. So the two varieties that you'll see in the United States are the ruby crowned kinglet and the golden crowned kinglet. So the ruby is olive green overall, and they actually do have a little red patch on the head, which is seen only in the males. The golden crowned kinglet is going to have a gold patch on the head, which is sometimes outlined in red, or it may just look gold. This list would not be complete if we didn't talk about the non-native European starling. So starlings were introduced to the United States, and they're super pretty. They have a lot of iridescence in the adults. They have a yellow bill. The younger ones are gonna look more black with some white spots on them as their feathers develop. But they will come in big flocks and sometimes raid your feeders. So people don't like that they're coming in these huge groups. It's not their fault they're here, but they will kind of take over sometimes, and you will often see them in large groups. So they may be in trees staging, and then they'll all come to the feeder at once and then kind of go back to a different spot. So non-native species, that's also very beautiful. Additionally, there might be cuckoos hanging around. They're normally not going to come to your bird feeder, and I find that they're often very shy. But you have the yellow-billed cuckoo as well as the black-billed cuckoo. And a lot of times, as soon as I see them, they want to get away. They want to hide, they don't want to be seen. I've found that they're very elusive. So anytime I get a really clear view of a cuckoo, I'm very happy. Although not super common in backyards, we're going to talk about some of the nightjar species that may be around, such as the eastern whippoorwill. They're very well camouflaged. They look exactly like a stick, and they will make the whippoorwill vocalization, so that's probably how you would know they would be in the area if they are. I feel like as development has kind of taken over, they're less in yards as they used to be, and you have to travel a little further to see them. Also, you may see common nighthawks flying overhead. They have some white markings on the underside of their wing that you can look out for, and they make a little peent noise when they'll be flying through. Additionally, there may be some waterfowl and shorebirds that come by. So you may see flocks of Canada geese flying over. They're your standard goose with the black and white markings on the face and the brown body, known for hissing at people on college campuses, although they used to be much harder to find than they are now. Additionally, you might see mallards flying over, and I've actually had mallards come in to eat under bird feeders, so who knows what might happen. but males are gonna have that metallic green head and females are gonna be a little less colorful. And then on the shorebird front, the only one that you would probably have in your backyard is the killdeer. It's a very open area. They have the black and white markings here, reddish orange ring around their eye, and they make the killdeer vocalization. So they'll be foraging around in the grass, similar to what an American robin would be doing. Well, I hope you found this video helpful. I had a lot of fun taking you around the yard to talk about these different bird identifications. If you didn't see your bird in this grouping, there are a couple other things you can do. You can take out the handy field guide, either a printed one or an online one, search through there. A lot of the times you can search by different categories, whether it's color, size, shape, and then on some of the online ones, you can actually type in different things and narrow it down by categories. So it'll be like, what color was it? And you can put that in, and that can help you find out what you saw. If you have a photo of it, you can use some of the identification apps, but use caution with those. You always want to be double checking their work, not just assuming that it's correct. There's also some Facebook groups such as What's This Bird, where you can put in the info that they request. Make sure you're following the rules and people can chime in and let you know what they think as well. Well, it's so much fun to watch the birds in your yard, and I hope you found this video helpful. I had a lot of fun taking you on a tour of the yard. It's funny how different it looks through the different seasons, but that also makes it fun to see the different birds coming in during the different times of year. If you enjoyed this, please hit that subscribe button, and let me know in the comments below what your favorite backyard birds are. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Badgerland Birding.